What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Cleveland Pulse YouTube channel. I am your host, Justin Harold, and with me, as always, my co host, Jeff Santa. Today, we're going to be talking to you guys a little bit about a recap for the NFL Combine that happened this last week. Obviously, a lot of Browns fans paying attention to it. Jeff paying attention to it probably for, the most in depth that he's done it for the first time. Jeff?
Correct.
Fair to say. Yeah, usually I'm on the other end of it. I've been pretty busy the past week, so I have to catch up. But I did get to see a lot of stuff on Twitter about prospects and just overall thoughts. But like I said, the Browns obviously keeping a very close eye on two position groups. I think obviously everyone talks about the wide receivers at 13, but we think it's necessary to talk about the D line as well at 13 as a possibility. But with that being said, Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. This conversation is going to be overarching because whatever we do at 13, there's good options in the edge position and the wide receiver position to, flip it on the other side. If we go edge at 13, both classes are so deep is the bottom line. So I'm not really worried about I really do think the more that I look at this, look at the combine, look at the draft, look at our needs, us being at 23 last year, it was kind of tough to tell, like what were we going to do? And corner, there was the most amount of question marks there, I think, outside of, maybe taking a linebacker, maybe taking a defensive tackle. We knew it wasn't going to be an offensive pick for the most part. This year is a little bit different because it could be offense, it could be defense for sure. But people describe Andrew Berry as a draft the best available player and fit needs in secondary. So I don't know who we're going to take at 13, but it's going to be like, Greg Newsome was the best available player at cornerback. If the best available player at edge is better than the best available player at wide receiver, you never know, really.
Yeah, and it'll definitely be interesting because we have no insight. People will have their big boards and have their mocks and everything. And, Mel Kiper, I think, is the one who has the board at the time when they're drafting and everything. So we might see other players higher than what we personally view them as. But, yeah, I think, wide receiver and D line, D tackle or D end, really, could be a serious question at 13. There's, like Jeff said, overarching conversation because we could talk about trading backwards. We could talk about trading back into the first round, depending on what we draft and, who's falling and whatnot. But, yeah, it's been a very interesting week with combine stuff. Obviously, like we said, there's not a whole lot to take out of these workouts. Obviously, there's measurables and such.
Right.
Every year people want to knock on quarterbacks who have small hands. Joe Burrow 2 years ago, and now Kenny Pickett. And certainly there are other mentions like, D tackle, a 340-pound D tackle running a 4.8. It's kind of crazy when you think about some of those tight ends. He's right on their heels. So, and then wide receiver, obviously, you wanted to see the measurables in terms of speed because, hey, a lot of that matters. But I think that we got some good numbers, and Jeff paid attention to a lot of it. So I'm going to let him take over the conversation on wide receivers. Jeff, what did you see watching the drills for the first time? And let me just ask you, how tedious is it to watch that, like, as, like, an actual, like, I guess a scout, because that's how I view it. But, like, I've done that before where I've watched each day of the combine, and I've just been like, I probably didn't need to watch this.
It's very goofy because I feel like there's no, like, they actually go down to the field and you hear the coaches, like if it's a wide receiver coach from like the Bears or, a couple of the Steelers guys were there, like doing the timing for the 40-yard dash. But like, you just don't know like where this even came from. Why do they do this drill? Obviously it's, hands, speed, agility, and stuff like that, but there's not a great explanation outside of the 40. And that's why I think the 40 is so, explosive, because people just, it's simple. It's like, they're just going to run 40 yards. It's going to be timed, which apparently they couldn't even figure that out this year because Chris Olave runs a 4.21 unofficial, and then it's corrected to be a 4.39. So that was interesting. There was a lot of weird things going on. The funniest thing at the top, because I'm hearing coming into this draft class that there's some big wide receivers. I'm hearing that Drake London is every bit of 6'5". This is the funniest part to me. and he's there to measure out only. He's not doing anything because his ankle's still not 100%. And he measured in at like 6'3", 6 foot, almost 6'4". So I'm not saying, you know, he's still a big kid, but it's like everybody from USC was saying he plays, you know, 6'5" and that, and the other thing, but he's literally not, he's not even 6'4". So that's what I thought was interesting off the rip.
Yeah, and that's always one of the biggest things is like getting the measurements for quarterbacks, for wide receivers. Obviously, if you're a, you know, if you're a Kyle Pitts, maybe you're getting a lot of recognition at the tight end position, right. DNs. You know, if you're a top prospect, you're probably getting looked at a little heavier handed than most other guys. But yeah, I don't think it matters. I think
everybody knows colleges list people, you know, heavier and taller anyway. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure when I was, you know, going to college, they listed me. I was like 6'2", and I was like, that's pretty favorable for me. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that we want to note here is that you would look at Drake London and then probably go and try to find kid from. Oh my God, I'm awful with names right now. The kid from
I thought he was bigger too. He was only 6'2". I thought he was like 6'4", 6'5" as well. But I mean, he's 225 running a 4.55, and he was disappointed with that time. But I mean, he's 225 pounds, and I think I'm glad you said that, because if you're coming here, if you never seen our videos or whatever, or if you've seen our videos, this class is so easy to talk about because of all the, good names at the top. Of course, people are going to be doing analysis on Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Treylon Burks, Chris Olave, even people who are hurt like Jameson Williams, John Mechie. I think it's interesting to talk about people who we might not pick at 13, but who we could pick in the second round, who we could pick with our first pick in the third round. And some names I would like to point out as far as testing. Haven't watched, only a little bit of film for the second guy. I really like this dude out of Tennessee.
Okay.
Velus Jones. I think it's Velus Jones Jr. I'm not too certain. He's almost 6 foot tall, 4.31. People were commenting on our video, I think at the end of last season or end of this most recent season, saying he's going to be a future Brown. Like, we hope we get him in the third or fourth round. So that's somebody who I was put on to. And then I think he could be a second round pick, really, if he's still there. This kid, Alec Pierce from Cincinnati, 211 pounds, 4.33 40 time at 6'2".
Yeah,
he was very impressive to me.
You weren't really a fan of the Cincinnati guys.
I know.
So it's nice to hear that's coming on along. Jeff, what about, so I know you picked out two guys that you think could be there in the second round. What about, we go DN, we go D tackle at 13. What about the kid from Penn State, Jahan Dotson? Is he a little too short for your liking, a little too small for your liking? I think he's an interesting speed guy in my eyes.
Here's another thing, because he actually was not, I mean, he's still fast, 4.43, but there was plenty of people who were quicker than him.
Right.
Unfortunately, and this is where you say, we could look at the numbers, we could talk about this, we could go on the film. Him and David Bell, I think, could have been better. I think I was getting them actually mixed up just because they're both from the Big Ten and not in Ohio State. David Bell actually tested really, really bad. But Jahan Dotson, pretty good day for him. He's I don't know. We saw him make big plays against Ohio State, so I know why you bring him up.
Yeah, he's someone that I've been able to watch, and he kind of struggled only because his quarterback play was very poor in my eyes. I think Clifford really screwed him in some scenarios, but it's interesting because we've talked about the size being a factor for some of these guys, Treylon Burks, Drake London, and even, when you want to talk about the two Ohio State guys, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, those are guys that you all expect to be gone after the first round, but these guys in the second round that you can make the argument for are the ones that we need to keep an eye on because, hey, we saw and we heard reports last year of Anthony Schwartz being one of those guys that had worked out for the Browns and they had taken a liking.
They liked him. Yep.
And the very next thing you know, he's getting drafted in the third round for us. So definitely got to keep an eye on a lot of these guys that, throughout their, combines and throughout their pro days, see who gets to heat up and who gets brought in for workouts by the Browns, because wide receiver is a position that we could get 2 new players through the draft from. So that being said, Jeff, anything else to know about the wide receivers before we move on to the D-line?
Just look out for it to maybe be one of the best wide receiver classes in the history of the draft. That's like an easy take. That's a simple take. And usually those takes kind of scare me away from making them, because I prefer to be a contrarian in a lot of aspects of sports talk, sports banter, hot takes in general. But dude, there's going to be people in the second round with like 4.3 40-yard times and 39-inch verticals. Calvin Austin had a good day. A lot of people are saying Sky Moore for the Browns. People are thinking in the 3rd round, but now it's like after the combine, he's not making it out of the 2nd round. But dude, how lucky is it for us to have, between the free agents and between this draft, it's like kind of like last year. It's like the cornerbacks were very good in last year's draft, and we needed one. So we've been really lucky these last 2 off seasons, I think.
Yeah, it's really pick and choose with how Andrew Berry goes about it, and hopefully we'll be able to see and have a better, be able to identify exactly what's been addressed through free agency, and then go and kind of round out what else needs to be finished through the draft. So I think that's pretty much it for me on the wide receivers. Obviously, I talked Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave having great days. I think Olave probably helped his draft stock more than Wilson did, but at the end of the day, I think both guys are first-round guys. And yeah, like you said, in terms of thinking back on drafts and wide receivers, it's been a while since you couldn't tell who the first guy would be off the board, and that's about it. I mean, we'll see with pro days, what else we get out of those with wide receivers, but I think for now we've gotten what we can, and we're going to move on to the D-line. So, Jeff, the D-line, obviously D-tackle and D-end being a whole for us as of this moment. What are the guys that you're seeing out here? Which of them do you favor in terms of the Browns draft?
Well, you know me. I absolutely love defensive tackles, and I liked the defensive tackles last year. Specifically was pounding the table for us to draft Christian Barmore in the 1st round. Not even really certain how good of a year he had, but the state of athletics and the state of college athletes has never been at a greater peak. You got dudes who are 340 pounds, 6'6", Jordan Davis running, a 4.8 on the 40, 4.78 with a 1.68. I think they call that like a 10-yard split or something. I don't know, but the dude was laying on the ground, jumping up. He was shuffling from side to side. He looked like he could bend, pretty well for a guy his size. I think he's going to be the big name. I think he might get overdrafted, and that's not a knock on him, but if somebody took him in the first 10 picks, maybe, or maybe even the top 5, I think that would be an overdraft for sure. I know you were talking about him a lot, though. There's so many good ones in this draft as well.
Yeah, Jordan Davis is the favorite, and obviously he's one of what seems like a million players coming out of Georgia this year from that championship team. It kind of happens every year with, one of the championship teams. You look at them and you're like, hey, they just won the championship. They've got a lot of good dudes on this team. And yeah, they do have a lot of good dudes, primarily on the defensive side. Jordan Davis, Wyatt, I think, is the other D tackle in this group. And then they have the linebackers, the D ends that we haven't even talked about. I mean, there are quite a bit of guys from Georgia that we could realistically be seen in the Browns jersey next season, or just being seen drafted very highly this year. But moving on to the D ends, because obviously D tackles are fun to talk about. I love D tackles, but I think the end is the biggest question here. There's a lot of guys that could be there at 13, Jeff. I mean, there are guys that could slip. There are guys that have currently been hurting their stock by the sounds of it. And 13 picks, obviously each team ahead of us has got to fill a need and take the best player available, but that could lead us with 1 or 2 potential high-quality starting DNs at 13.
I think the defensive tackle is a little bit more simplistic to talk about and easier to discuss just because the wide receivers get a lot more buzz. It's more of a, better position to watch play. You usually don't come for, defensive tackle and defensive edge play for the most part. Of course, us Cleveland Browns fans do because of Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney. But I think there's going to be 2 guys off the board before us, easily, and I've always been saying that, would be Hutchinson and Kayvon Thibodeau. So while they had great testing days over this previous weekend, it's not really don't really put too much stock into them, just expecting them to be gone. But I think the favorite for us, if he would be there at 13, would be someone like George Karlaftis, who had a pretty good testing day. He had a great season. I think it's just a little bit of a complaint that he might need a little work. Same with a guy like David Ojabo, who we were talking about before we started the recording. Just a couple of athletic freaks who would totally benefit from being on, the defensive end team, the defensive end room for the Cleveland Browns, of course, being on the other side of Myles Garrett. So there's a lot of options there, and I think you're going to see one guy slip for sure, and I don't know if Andrew Berry will be able to pass on him.
Yeah, I think Ojabo is a very interesting talk because he kind of reminds you of, and when we're talking about him and Hutchinson, it would be the same conversation with Myles Garrett and a Jadeveon Clowney, or
Right.
anyone who plays the opposite side of Myles Garrett is like, hey, they played really well because this other guy is taking the attention off of them. And I think Ojabo, I think he could be a number 1 DN, but if he played the number 2, he could put up some big numbers. I think that's possible with any of these top 5 guys, moving into that position. I mean, you're not being drafted to be the primary pass rusher, but to get there every now and then alongside Myles Garrett, or if you got your one-on-ones, then work it till you get there. But hey, I'd be really happy. I think Ojabu's the one that I'd be like, hey, at 13, if there's wide receiver and there's Ojabu, you would be very hard pressed to make me feel upset about passing up on wide receivers and going Ojabu. George Karlaftis is an interesting pick coming out of Purdue. I don't know too much about him. Testing is great, but a lot more of film work to be done on a lot of these guys. Trayvon Walker, the DN from Georgia. Again, like we said, a lot of those guys to talk about. But I just think that you saw Jason Owe last year was talked about being a very raw guy. I think he hadn't played football very long either. And the Ravens go out, pick him, and he played phenomenal against us. So what's to say that you can't do that with one of these, 3 guys that aren't, Thibodeau or Hutchinson? I mean, it's very hard to pass up on another DN to pair with Myles Garrett.
And it's just to reiterate, it's another one of those classes where defensive, defensive and edge rusher is going to be on the table regardless if we sign Clowney or not, especially if it's even if it's a 2-year deal for Clowney. It's like, well, we need a backup plan after him. Go check out the Browns roster right now. The defensive line is brutal. It's actually really bad. Obviously, Clowney being a free agent, he's probably going to test the market. He's not included on the list, but it's like Miles, Porter Gustin. That's basically it, with a lot of holes, especially with, Takk McKinley sustaining that terrible injury at the end of the year. But what I'm liking about this class is that I'm hearing a lot of these guys have advanced motors, and that's the type of thing you heard about, when TJ Watt came out. That's, both of the Watt brothers, they never stop running around. They're always, going very hard, full go the whole time. And that's what you need in this division, whether it be, pretty mobile Joe Burrow, and of course, Lamar Jackson running around for the whole 4 quarters of every single game we play, that he's, healthy. And who knows if the Steelers want to go out and draft a Malik Willis, if they want to add a Mitch Trubisky or somebody who is actually decently mobile. It's just something you have to be able to do in the AFC North, which is weird enough because you would think you would want to bolster your interior defensive line, which is also true with the abundance of premium running backs in the division. But I just think we're, 2 first-round picks, or maybe trade up early in the second round after you get 13. I don't think we would be too displeased with anyone at this 13th overall pick right now.
Jeff, I'm going to throw a scenario out there because I think this is probably the most intriguing and the, best way to possibly talk about a wide receiver in the second round.
Okay.
You get to pick 13, and there's been no wide receivers drafted.
Ooh.
So that means you have your pick at whoever you think is your favorite. Now, that could be a bad thing or a good thing in terms of the Browns, because you could just think, hey, we have our option at any one of these guys, did they make us feel good enough to go at 13 for them? Or you get a guy at like Ojabo who falls and they think, hey, we didn't think he was going to be here realistically. They snatch him up. And then you're thinking, Andrew Berry's thinking, hey, we're sitting here at 13. How many wide receivers realistically do we think can be drafted between us and the second round?
Yes.
Because a lot of guys, we know, Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks, Drake London, all those guys will probably be gone. And then you start going, well, all right, who else could potentially be gone between the first round? I think a lot of interesting names to keep an eye on for the second round or trading back into the first round, late first round to get another wide receiver would be Jameson Williams, torn ACL at the end of the year. You don't know when he's going to come back, if he's going to be able to start the season. Let's put it that way. Chris Olave, who is, I think he's borderline first round. I think at the very least, he's at the very late first round pick. And then Jahan Dotson, who I think is probably more or less going to be a second round guy. With that being said, if you got a DN Ojabo at 13 and could somehow find a way back into the first round and grabbing a guy like Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, or Jahan Dotson with your second pick in the draft, who's really going to be upset with passing on a Garrett Wilson, a Drake London, or a keep forgetting his freaking name now, Treylon Burks. The only argument I have for that, and I'm not the first one to say this because I heard it on the radio. It's a very good argument, though, is, hey, at 13, if you go wide receiver, this is your, hey, we're betting on Baker Mayfield pick. But if your pick at 13 is a DN, you're going, hey, we know what we need, and we're confident that whatever we've done in free agency is going to get us past that idea that we need to draft a wide receiver at 13 for Baker Mayfield's sake.
I think I think you just described Andrew Berry's philosophy on the first 2 days of the draft, literally right there, right now on March 7th. The free agency period, I think, we've already seen moves. We just talked about Njoku. That is going to shape, closer to the day who we're probably going to take. But it also might not. We could add an edge and let we could sign an edge, let Clowney walk, still draft an edge. We could add a couple, wide receiver free agents and still draft a wide receiver at 13. So I do agree with you that if there's no wide receiver off the board at 13, you're going to still get probably a first round wide receiver if it's trading up into the first round at the back end, or, taking a second round wide receiver similar to last year. I think if we could get the first 2 days of the 2022 draft, like we did the first 2 days of the first night of the 2021 draft, that's a win. You get a first round linebacker in the second round in JOK, and of course you get Greg Newsome, at the same time. But I like that. I like how you laid that out for sure, because there really could be no wide receivers gone at 13. You're correct.
Yeah, and I think I think Andrew Berry has been surgical in the first 2 rounds of the draft since he's taken over. I think we've been able to pinpoint down, because of his success in free agency before the draft, hey, who are likely targets, the most likely targets for the Browns at this position, and what is Andrew Berry actually thinking about. So I think by the time next, month rolls around, we're in March right now. I think to this day, a month from now, we will be in the draft.
Yep.
I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure it's typically.
Yeah, I don't know what day it is.
I think it's typically on the 7th. We'll do a quick search here. NFL Draft 2022.
A little later this year.
Is it now? Is it like the 13th or something?
It's actually basically May.
Really? Am I dumb though? Was it that late last time? Or wasn't that late? Oh, it was. All right. Maybe so. Maybe I have something. What is at the beginning of the month?
There's so many dates, dude.
All right. So it's typically April, like the end of April going into May. So that's my fault. So by the time we come around next month and we do a video of a mock draft or something, we'll have a better idea of what Andrew Berry might be going for. But I think there's a lot of interesting scenarios and definitely a lot of quality to be picked here for sure. So, Jeff, before we call this one quits, you got anything else to say?
And you just really have to hope that whatever we do, like let's just say we go with someone who's a raw defensive end talent. You have Myles Garrett. You might even have Jadeveon Clowney. How much is that prospect going to learn from May 1 to, August or September, being with Myles Garrett, being in contact, whatever, all the things that they do. If they don't even go to OTAs. I mean, the rookies will, but just that type of nature as well. And secondary point, which actually a totally different video we could probably do, but do you draft a wide receiver at 13 and you get rid of Jarvis, and then it's like, okay, the mentor for this first round draft pick in the league, who's NFL ready, that's a given. If you're in the first round, if you're in the first 1 to 3 rounds, I would say you're NFL ready for the most part, maybe outside of quarterbacks. But if you take a guy at 13 who's NFL ready and his mentor is Jarvis Landry for 1 year, maybe longer, maybe 2 years at most, or is it Donovan Peoples-Jones? That's the argument for maybe just eating Jarvis's salary just because of that. If he still wants to be here, if he wants to contribute, if he wants to be a mentor to lead the wide receiver group, regardless if he plays every game, he's still going to be the voice. He's going to be he's going to show them what to do, show them the ropes, and just how, Stefanski wants things done. So I think there are some interesting talking points all around, and that April 28th date is going to creep up on us for sure.
Yeah, it's going to fast approach for sure. And we're definitely going to be here probably within the next week or two with free agency talk and cuts and whatnot. So make sure you guys are subscribing, leaving likes on the videos, commenting and everything so that we can get your thoughts on what might happen before that April 28th date. And with that being said, we'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.